Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you are in the world across the 7 continents. And today we have a longtime friend now for almost 2 years, Jimmy, the CEO and founder of the Human Aspect Organization. How you doing over there, Jimmy, in Norway?
I'm doing great. It's midday, so I guess I'm a little bit further into waking up than you are. So I'm doing great. Thank you.
That's awesome, man. I woke up probably around 45 minutes ago and I got my little ritual going, but I was looking forward to our meeting for a while, Jimmy. Not only are you what I consider a good friend of mine, but you're also a role model for many individuals. You have many accomplishments, and the Human Aspect Organization, the way it's progressed and how far it's come, is a reflection of what you've given it and who you are. So, do you mind sharing for the audience that's unfamiliar with your work about the Human Aspect Organization and maybe a little bit about yourself as well?
Yes. So thank you, first of all, for having me and for doing your work as well. Like I've said so many times, I truly believe in rising the level of knowledge. And even for myself, as a non-full professional, I have loved reading some of your posts and getting small lessons about psychology that is useful in the everyday life, and also reminders about things we know, but that we potentially had forgotten, right? So just seeing a small post or a good video or one of the longer YouTube videos or podcast really raises the awareness level, but also the knowledge level, which I think is one of the key elements to be able to tackle what I consider to be the mental health crisis around the world. So thank you for that as well.
No problem.
And the Human Aspect is a foundation started in Norway by myself after a few years in Doctors Without Borders. And in the beginning, it was more of an inspirational project. It was more curious about what made humans humans. That's why it was called the Human Aspect. It was inspired by the documentary Human and Humans of New York. But very quickly, we realized that this has the potential to become a full-scale mental health project and a full-scale mental health tool. First of all, to tackle similar issues like you are focusing on your Instagram, which is raising awareness, realizing that people are not alone with these challenges around the world, and also, of course, fighting the massive stigma that surrounds a lot of the mental health realm. And we saw an opportunity to deal with that through interviewing ordinary people in in-depth video interviews. So we then created what is now called the Life Experience Library. And in 2016, when we started it, it was the first of its kind. And now it's obviously the largest of its kind. And it's a free library of in-depth video interviews where people like myself share how I managed to deal with the toughest challenge that I ever faced in life and what I learned from that I wish that I knew personally back when I was facing the challenge. So then a little bit about me and why this is important is that when I was around 13, I had struggled for a very long time up to then with bullying. I grew up on the countryside in Norway, where kind of the box of what is the right thing or the right person to be is narrow and small. So I didn't feel like I belonged, not at all. I grew up as well without my biological father, which also carried a trauma with me as a kid of not being good enough, obviously, even for my own father, which is quite a heavy trauma to carry in the beginning. And I had ADHD and didn't fit in. So I had kind of a mixture of early challenges that kind of made me as a kid and as a youth ruthless, not ruthless, but without roots. When I was 13, my mom was one of the few people who kind of saw me for being me, and that was there. She was faced with cancer herself, touch wood, she's still alive, but she was faced with cancer, and it made her so focused on herself and her recovery and disease and understanding what it was. Was it severe cancer? Was it just something we could remove, or what was the situation? And in that context, she didn't fully spend the same energy on me, and she acted out a little. And of course, I was a teenager myself, so clearly I was acting out as well. And then in that moment, I remember ending up sitting in a tree in the countryside where I'm from. And this time I wasn't contemplating about life or reflecting or looking at the view. I was planning how to end my life, and not if, but how. And luckily for me, I came to the conclusion that I should jump, which was kind of the only kind of method that I would be sure to succeed. Because I remember quite vividly thinking that I thought I would fail at that as well. I felt I failed at everything. So I was like, okay, I'm going to fail at that as well. And I'm going to end up in a wheelchair, sitting there for the rest of my life, you know, from neck down, paralyzed, because I was an idiot, not because something happened or because I had a disease, but because I jumped from not high enough or tried to hang myself or something like that without success. And that was kind of the bottom of that feeling. I was feeling so low that I didn't even think I could succeed. So I wanted to be sure. So then I said, okay, I will go to Oslo, which is the capital of Norway. It's like 1 hour away from where I grew up. And they gave me a week, 1 week to prepare for going somewhere where there was a lot of tall buildings. And luckily for me, in that week, my grandmother, as the first person, asked me, so how are you doing with all of this with your mom and in life in general? She saw that something was off. And my grandmother was the kind of person that you couldn't lie to, you know, even though you have a mask, she was the one who saw straight past the mask. I know probably a lot of people out there that has a family member like that, someone that actually sees beyond your masks. And then luckily for me, things started getting better. So when the weekend came, I didn't do it. And then slowly I realized that sports could be my savior or my resting pillow. Because on the sports field, with ADHD, with a huge need to impress and to get attention, it was the perfect combination for a kid to be able to perform well. And suddenly on the field or in the basketball court, no one cared if I was cool, or if I was too emotional as a young kid, or if I was a bit strange, or if, you know, all the things that I was bullied for, being chubby and all these things, just disappeared because I was good. And then at least for some pockets of the day, I was just valued and just judged based on what I did, nothing else. And that was perfect for me. And then that kind of gave me those pockets of rest that I needed. So then fast forward into that, it took me to athletes college, finally took me away from the countryside, which made it easier for me. And then things slowly started getting better. And I ended up in the special forces because that's mandatory service in Norway and I was in good shape. So that's where I ended up. And I ended up being a rescue diver in the Norwegian Coast Guard, almost in the North Pole, in like an island north in the Bering Sea. And then after that, I didn't really know what to do with my life. So I found a friend who was studying shipping, international shipping. And I had been then 1 year at sea. I grew up right next to the ocean. And then I was like, oh, it's a good fit. I went to school and I come from like a humble Norwegian working class background, lower working class in Norway, which is considered to be lower working class in one of the richest countries in the world. And suddenly after just 1 year in school, because I've always been working very hard, right, to get my dad to recognize me, even though he never would. And suddenly after 1 year, I was offered a job. And I was so set on being the first in my family to get a bachelor's degree that it didn't even cross my mind that was possible. And it was offered by what was then considered one of the biggest and most interesting companies on the planet, which was just like mind-blowing to me. And then suddenly, obviously, I took that opportunity. I was there for 6.5 years. I came to Singapore, was living the dream life of all my friends, and then I shattered my spine in a football accident. And suddenly, for the first time in my life, I had to look myself in the mirror and ask, who are you? What are you doing? And why are you here? And what are you good at? Like, what on earth are you doing here? because this is not the life that I wanted. This is the life I chose to impress someone that is never going to give me that recognition. So I was living the life for society, for my dad, for who knows, for whoever. And then suddenly I took a massive career change. I had to, of course, go into recovery. I had 18 months recovery. I shattered the spine, so a lot of my nerves to my right foot was broken. So my sports identity, my safe haven was taken away from me. So I couldn't do competitive sports ever again. And then I started working for Doctors Without Borders. Of course, like typical human, you go from capitalistic left, and then you need a change. You go to all the way to the right. And then suddenly I found myself in Afghanistan, in Syria, in Greece, in Turkey, and working, of course, with the contexts that was different, and with people that was struggling and that was truly desperate. And in war zones, of course, in Afghanistan specifically, and Syria. So that changed my perspective again, and that's where I came back to starting the human aspect in 2016, is that I needed to answer the question, what am I good at? And what I have always been good at is getting people to open up. I've always been good at leading people, and I've always been good at understanding broader perspective because of my ADHD brain. I see patterns and I see quite huge perspectives that maybe not so normal for ordinary people. So I was like, okay, how to use that? And that's where I realized I want to create a platform where people like myself who felt alone, felt I had no one to talk to, and I felt I was the only one going through that challenge, which is obviously naive in a world of 7 to 8 billion people, but still that's normal to think, right, in a challenge. So let's create a library where people can learn from other people who have been through the same thing, but they're further ahead in the path, all over the world, all for free. So that is what is now the Life Experience Library, and the massive, of course, platform built around it. So now, almost 4 years in, three and a half years in 2019, we had users of the library and the full interviews in every single country in the world. And we have, of course, quite a big Facebook page, Instagram page, where we have tiny teasers of the interview, and we publish every day. And of course, then you can have a link for free to the full interview. So that is the the short version. And of course, now I'm a public speaker. I have courses for big corporations about mental health at the workplace. I've been a personal advisor for top-level athletes within mental health or mental training. And of course, I have a lot of talks around. I had a TEDx in Portugal, and in general, massively engaged in this, leading the team that is now 40 people full-time on this human aspect foundation here in Norway, and traveling the world as well too. Now we have more than 500 interviews.
That is so awesome, man. Not only your story, but I'm so glad that you ended up finding yourself and what you're good at. And ironically enough, what you were good at doesn't include necessarily shipping. Not saying it's a bad or negative profession or anything. What you're good at is helping and making a difference in the world. And a true entrepreneur by nature, if I might add. And the fact that you're not only do what you do with the human aspect, which I've used in my clinical sessions before, especially the addiction portion, because most of my clients are struggling with addiction. The reason they got into the mess sometimes within the court system that they're in is because of their substance use. And I have used your videos before, because I think you didn't directly say this, but in the process of creating the human aspect organization, you wanted to create a tool as well to help the people around the world with their mental health, because there's not enough professionals for everybody, right? And it's not so easily accessible, and there's a lot of monetary value when it comes to seeing a professional, and sometimes people don't have the means, and the government doesn't have the resources. And I think the human aspect is already doing that more than you think, Jimmy, and I appreciate the work that you do, man, so much, man. With the human aspect organization, the stigmas that you've tried challenging, the experiences that you wanted to make more conscious for everybody. Do you feel like the human aspect has been able to do just that in your eyes?
Yes, and of course, some of the videos. I think the video that has been most seen has been seen 1.6 million times, I think, and it's a Somali woman. And obviously, Somalia is one of the countries where, like you mentioned, clearly don't have a well-established mental health system and massive stigma around mental health. It doesn't exist in their culture, according to themselves, or many of them. So that interview alone was seen around 500,000 times in one city in Somalia on Facebook and Instagram and so on. And just those short clips of someone they look up to, someone that looks like them, that talks about their culture, their context, their cities, that then legitimize that you can struggle with complex grief, which was what she was talking about, is massive. Just someone they look up to, that just makes it okay for them to go through with that and suddenly realize that it's a problem that you don't have to live with. Not in this way forever, that it can get better, that you can talk about it with people around you, that there is methods you could use that can take you further away from the grief, for example, to put some reasoning to it or be able to handle it, and of course the nightmares and things like that, if it's linked to war, which this was. And of course also finding some purpose with what happened, to use that as fuel to do work, which this woman did. So, and that's just one example. And of course, like we said, we had users in every single country. And we get messages, like so many messages all the time, of people that saying very often, like, I didn't think anyone else was going through this, which for me is still so fascinating, because I was in that mindset myself. And obviously I'm more than reflected enough to understand that that isn't true. But still, though I know it isn't true, I still feel like that, because you have excuses in your head. You're like, but not everyone has this, and this, and this context. I know other people are struggling with that, but not with this context. And that was the beauty of the human aspects interviews, is that you normally take away the context and you focus on the emotional experience of it. And then suddenly a story fits yours. And suddenly you can learn from someone that is from Somalia, even though you are American. And suddenly you can deal with complex grief from someone coming from a culture that's so far away from yours, because the context isn't why you ended up there. The context isn't why you're grieving. It's the emotional situation, which is why you're grieving. And that is the same. So yes, and of course, the social media platforms are the essential key, like for you as well, for the anti-stigmatization.
I love how you mentioned there, Jimmy, how someone from Somalia and then other people can relate because they're from the same area, and they say, hey, this isn't now just another person that comes from a privileged status somewhere else. This person's from Somalia. I'm from the region or the regions around. I can relate to this person. And at the same time, it can reach another side of the world, and people can have a better understanding of not only what's happening on the other side of the world, but how someone on the other side of the world is experiencing similar things that I'm experiencing, or feeling in a certain way, because you use the word emotion, that I'm feeling. And this person can get through it. This person is moving forward. This person has found resilience within themselves. So can I. And I love that part about the Human Aspect organization, that it brings connection around the globe, and it allows people to see that, hey, they're not alone in this process. And so, Jimmy, I really appreciate the work you do, because I like to see life as a three-dimensional prism. And, we got the past, the present, the future. And obviously the past happened, it can't be changed, but the memories stick with us. So we don't make the same mistakes moving forward. That's why we have memory. That's why, so we don't make the same mistakes moving forward. It's almost an evolutionary trait that we have that leads us to the present, because everything we've ever been through, every step we've taken has manifested right before our eyes. That's why we're standing where we're standing. That's why I'm in this screen in front of this bookshelf. It's because of everything that's happened, and it's melted in a pot to form the ingredients before me. And then the third one is the vision moving forward. And that is so crucial. So when you were mentioning your story, Jimmy, it's not, I'm not saying I'm glad all those things happened, because the way they happened, because it could have been way better, obviously. But I am glad that it gave you resiliency to be where you're at right now, because the world needs people like you, man. And real people, genuine people, people that want to help others. And the reward isn't of monetary or materialistic value. The reward is something intrinsic that you feel. And research has shown that when we do good deeds for others, when we're helping others and we see progression, then we get a certain chemical reaction in the brain and within our body that's almost the equivalent of substance use, right? I know it sounds crazy to some individuals out there, but it's true. It's research. This 2020, Jimmy, it's been a very, let's call it, unique and unusual year, both at the same time, the two U's. We had some crazy unexpected events. I mean, one weekend I'm out, I think in the middle of February, it's my friend's birthday and I'm going to a birthday party and everything seems normal. There's a certain path I have and I'm thinking about moving forward. And then the next month, halfway through, all of a sudden there's a coronavirus pandemic happening, and one that, because I'm from Miami, Florida, that our president said would never touch our soil. And obviously that was out there, man, and it hit hard, and it's caused a lot of turmoil, a lot of things people weren't expecting. I'm still seeing clients, but there was a time it got a little slow, and I can only imagine for the people out there who don't have jobs, who right now are struggling to how are they going to pay their rent? How are they going to pay their car? What are they going to do? And at the same time, the free time, not only has it created more anxiety as to how they're going to accomplish these things, I think it's awoken a lot of people in different ways and started asking some of the same questions that we were talking about earlier, such as, what am I doing with my life? Where am I going? What's going to happen? And maybe even, and I think I mentioned this last time we talked, even marriages are a question, because now there's more FaceTime and you're actually asking real questions, and questions that used to be avoided now are coming to the forefront. So what has been your experience with 2020 with when you're interviewing the people for the Human Aspect organization in comparison to previous years?
I think, first of all, with 2020, there's some aspects of it that you touched upon that I would like to elaborate as well. Is that, number one, for the first time in a very, very, very long time, we're talking probably since the Second World War, there has been some events in between that has also been like global, but not like this one. Now, for once, we have a common enemy, right? And suddenly the entire globe at the same time is taking in a challenge that we are in one way or another fighting similarly and facing similarly. And for many countries, at least most countries, it has then resulted in social distancing. A lot of people have lost their job. A lot of people had massive changes in their life, had to work from home. Kids were sent home. For some kids, that's great. For other kids, that's horrible if their parents are bad, right? For example. So to be able to actually look at it at a broader picture, like what you said, I think for some people, this has now given them a lot more time to think about, where am I? How do I feel? And like, what kind of human am I? It's like both self-worth and also kind of your future self plan has been really in their mind. And most of the time, most of us are just stressing between all the things we should do and shouldn't do, and Instagram and Facebook, and so we don't really think about these things, right? Most of us. So this has now shifted that. So like most of us have faced it in one way or another, thinking more about it. Now comes the big question, what this will result in. Like you said, on one side, I'm 100% sure, because we see it already in Norway. We see statistics in Norway, in the UK, in EU, all over the place. In the US as well, I've seen some small research on it, that mental health is increasing, which for me says itself, because if you have more time to fiddle about your problems and your traumas and your struggles, they're going to come up consciously and they're going to cause more trouble. So it says itself. Plus, on top of losing your job, like you're saying, stress, insecurity about the future, potential death, facing massive grief for all the people that have lost people to the COVID, and that's all. So that says itself. On the other side is the awareness. But now we are in kind of a important intersection. Will we now allow everybody to just go back to normal? Because Norway is a little bit of a lens into the future, because we took a quite quick hit. We had the money to be able to close down the country very quickly. Social distancing very fast. Everyone was then giving packages and like certainties that like, just stay at home, we will take care of you, the government will fix it. And since we have so high trust as well with the government, people did it. So the curve very quickly flattened in Norway and then started massively dipping. And now we have less than 10 new cases in the entire country every day. And we have less than 15 people in the hospitals in the whole country. So by all means, Corona, the first wave anyway, in Norway is finished. And now the last weeks, we have opened up the country fully. So now you can even have events up to 200 people. You know, in the streets, it was 30 degrees the last week. If you were here visiting, you wouldn't even think that Corona existed. So now, what I have seen is that I thought, like you said, that this will result in people making choices. You know, different choices. Will maybe change jobs, change careers, change a boyfriend, girlfriend, change different kinds of aspects of their life, maybe eat healthier, do less of this, more of that. But what I saw from like a general perspective in the streets is that most people were so eager to get back to where they were that I'm not sure that we're going to carry that lesson. Some, yes, most, no. And that comes the big question of what can we do to ensure that this is actually something we can look back at and say was a lesson for the world, was something that helped us and not just caused problems. Because on this side, you have this massive burden of mental health rise. And then you have all the practical consequences of COVID. And then you have the fear of wave 2. And if we don't take the lesson on top of that, then this is going down in history as one of the worst years for humans in decades, probably since the Second World War as a global humanity. And on top of that, of course, now the revival of Black Lives Matter as well, which has been sadly a 400-year-old fight that I'm quite sad that is still here. It's sad because it means we have failed as a human collective race. Which is sad. We'll talk more about that later. But that also, of course, will come on top of everything now, which makes 2020 just a horrid year if we don't take the lesson.
The Black Lives Matter 400 years sounds too little. I think that's been happening thousands of years, and it's so unfortunate. That's it. The point doesn't get taken away. It's so unfortunate, and but that last part that you mentioned there, where we thought people this was a good time. Actually, it's not we thought. It is still actually a good time to reflect and see where you're at in your life. At least I did it in my own. And I asked personal questions like what am I doing in my professional life? What's the next step? What's the next step with Psych Life? What's my options to develop other streams of income? And this was a good time to ask all those questions while this was happening because of the uncertainty of the future. And when there's uncertainty in the present, there's uncertainty in the future. And that was a good point there, Jimmy. And I think people, they did ask those questions for a bit. And we saw it. I mean, the development, I believe, of Black Lives Matter, the movement came from this thing where I have a lot of time to think, what am I doing? And, I normally don't bring up these subjects, but I feel like the aspect of taking sports away, right? It's like the gladiators of the old days. They took sports away: football, basketball, soccer, baseball, you name it. And now what are people occupying their time with? And people, they have to occupy their time. They typically occupy with entertainment, and now there's no entertainment. And you can only watch so much Netflix before. I mean, people, at least I've talked from personal experience 5 years ago. I mean, you can only watch so much before that's it. And so I feel like the lack of sports as well has led people to asking these questions. But then all of a sudden they backtrack because they start having to realize, hey, if I don't pay my rent, I'm gonna have to get out of here. And if I don't work, how am I gonna feed myself? And so I feel like those survival, it's like Abraham Maslow's pyramid. If those survival needs aren't met, then those are the focus. And that's why these questions that they were having in the beginning all of a sudden subdued. But I appreciate you bringing that up, man. And I wonder how much sports being taken away really does have an effect as to what's going on, because I've never seen something like this, and I've only been alive 28 years, 29 years, and I've never seen something like this where there's no sports, there's nothing. And it's personally for me, it's been an opportunity because I don't have time to constantly be watching sports, but I will find myself watching, let's say, 10 minutes of a highlight, or I will find myself, I'm going from my office to my client's house during this 15-20 minute drive. Let me turn on the sports radio. And since they don't have that, all of a sudden I find myself listening to Sadhguru, or listening to an audiobook, or listening to this. And it depends how people use it. But what aspects do you think being sports taken out right now has had on individuals around the world?
General, your Cicero, the Roman wise man back in the day from the Roman Empire, said, give the people bread and circus and you can do whatever you want. So basically what he said, as long as people are not starving, like fully, because obviously some of them were, but they weren't starving, dying, and you give them circus, which, as you mentioned, was the gladiators, it was the shows, it was sports, it was all these kinds of entertainment of the old days. Today, that is one of the key elements for why I personally think the US hasn't gone into full mayhem. If you took away that, like you have done now, where you will see mayhem and it will continue, is because US and some other countries as well, but specifically the US, you have had this problem for a long time. Suppressed people, a lot of people can't pay rent, can't do this, the prison system, and 100 other things that people know about now that makes a lot of US citizens living very low in the Maslow pyramid, as you're saying. Even though that they don't think so much about it, they do. But then you have entertainment, which kind of pulls people out of it so that you forget about it. If you ask people their relationship to sports, and you ask the poorer people and the people struggling, and they will mention it as the most important thing in their life. That one break, that one Sunday you go to a match, or that one basketball court that you could watch on TV with your friends for 2 hours. Like, I forgot that I was a bullying victim. Normal people facing a shitty life can for 2 hours forget about it and just be a fan, supporting your team, or looking at a role model that looks like you. Because in sports is one of the very few places where racism exists, don't get me wrong, but where the multicultural essence is different. Like, Afro-American basketball players is obviously, there's thousands of them, which is one of the fields where athleticism has kind of conquered the rest of the world society. So it's a perfect place to feel like you have heroes to aspire to and look up to. And when that is taken away from you, like you said, suddenly you're taken back into the bottom of the Maslow's pyramid. And on top of that, you lost your job, you did this and that. So when you now have the opportunity to arise to a cause that has been there all along, this is very important that people stop talking about, that this just happened now because of George Floyd. It didn't. That was just a tiny event. That was kind of the last bit of the top. And then, of course, now you also have time. because maybe you are out of a job. So let's go demonstrate then, full time. Your kids is not in school. Let's bring the kids, right? And then suddenly you have this opportunity to arise to the cause like we've never seen in history, not just in the US, but around the world. Suddenly you had a global movement, much bigger than last time when Black Lives Matter came up the first time in social media era. And then, of course, social media on top of that. Because the fascinating part now as well that a lot of people don't think about is that when the economy is down, what happened to all the ads? They disappeared, because the first thing a company will remove is their marketing budget. They will remove it because there's no clients that is buying their things, unless it's a mask and sanitation equipment. So suddenly there's a much more space on social media. And then you just mentioned sports. One of the most seen things on social media disappeared. So what happens? Now all the other things that we haven't seen in a while comes up the news feeds, right? On Instagram and on Facebook and TikTok. And suddenly it is police videos. Suddenly it is inspirational people. Suddenly it is more mental health. Suddenly, and suddenly it's easier to spread a campaign organically as well, because there's not so much noise that is part of the circus. So I believe that this is a unique opportunity in history where we as a collective human race can actually address racism and discrimination once and for all. Obviously, I'm not naive in the sense that I think it will disappear in 5 minutes, but I believe that we can actually address it for the first time in a way where people will actually do something, where we will actually see acts of anti-racism by people like myself, people of lighter complexion that I potentially and of course haven't experienced that kind of racism. Then I will suddenly act more on it now, because I am more aware, I have more knowledge, I have educated myself, and I do care. And a lot of people do, but in an ordinary life of the hustle, you can be a good human as you want, but you don't have capacity to think about other people's problem in a normal life, right? And suddenly now you do. Suddenly now you have time to think about your next door neighbor, which is maybe potentially from Africa or from South America or from a country that has gone through a lot of racism. And you will be like on the bus looking and like, what just happened? That's not okay. Because you're not into your highlights with the NBA between Golden State and Miami Heat, right? So there's something happening now which makes me positive that we can actually do it. And it's a human failure, and that's why it's a human problem to fix. And no matter what the hashtag is called, this is a human problem that we all need to address, because it is affecting all of our mental health. Because imagine if we had a society where you were judged by what you do, like Martin Luther King said in his famous speech as well, I dream of the day where my children is only judged by their actions, right? And nothing else, not the color of their skin, he said. And that's what I dreamt of when I was younger, not to be judged of who I was, but to be judged of what I did, not who they thought I was. And that is a magic, right?
I love, no, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry about that at the end, Jamie. I really appreciate what you said. I found it a little funny how you said the life of the hustle. I think is what, I don't know why that was funny to me. And you mentioned Golden State versus Miami Heat, which is funny because I am obviously a Miami Heat fan. But, you touch on so many good points there about how now, because we don't have that, we get to think a little bit extra and a little deeper inside, and how this is a human problem. Because right now the focus is Black Lives Matter, but next year the focus might be, those from Mexico that come into the United States, and they get deemed as this negative light and this negative picture. And I don't want, for the world out there, if you're not from the US and you like listening to this podcast out there, and sorry I haven't said what's up here throughout this podcast, but if you're tuning in, and the U.S., we're not lynching people here across the corner. I mean, I'm here in a building right now across the street, about 3 blocks down. It's an African American community where it's not that, but it's the systemic issues involving certain aspects. Like, for example, most of the prison system is African American or Black. And it's not necessarily because the police are going out there looking for Black people. It's more because the situations they're coming from is tough situations. Without having money, it leads to more crime. And I work with the Black community, and since they're committing crimes to make ends meet, and that's the only way they know, then that's what's going to happen. And then all of a sudden we have these disproportionate numbers as to what's going on. And I just want to make that out there, because sometimes, Jimmy, I see people thinking that we're like lynching people out here, and that's not what's going on. It's just the systemic issues and how the ratios and the percentages are so far off. And there's a problem. There's a problem there, and it's a big time problem. And it's a world problem, because, like I said, today's African Americans, but what's going to happen next year and the year after that? And it's a world problem with all human beings. And I love how you use that, because if it's not all of us coming together, then this isn't going to go anywhere. And I love how you say it goes beyond the U.S. There's aspects and there's parts of the U.S. that are completely different from others. When we think of the U.S., it's basically 50 nations in one. It really is, because there's 50 states, and right now I'm in Miami, Florida. Yeah, right now I'm in the Miami, Florida, and it's a huge melting pot here, huge. But if I were to go and take a drive up to the Panhandle of Florida, and this is huge, this is a 12-hour drive, okay, and to the Panhandle of Florida, I will be deemed in a negative light, because it may not seem too much difference between you and I in this video, but to them, my accent is very strong, and they will start seeing me as, I've had people ask me if I'm Mexican, and that's where I was going with. We both know I'm Cuban ancestry, but it doesn't matter. That's the problem. It doesn't matter. Or I'll walk into Target and I'll go to 3 different shopping lanes, and it's the same guy who's keeping his distance, but he's watching me because of the potential I might do something because of how I look. And, most of the stereotypes and prejudices that we have, I don't think people realize it, but they're unconscious. We don't realize that we have stereotypes and prejudice. For example, if I'm walking inside a store, the first thing I'm doing is I'm assessing what's in there, who's in there. If I look at somebody and I'm profiling them, it happens on an unconscious level. But now we are conscious of this, and we're conscious of our stereotypes and when we do engage in prejudice behaviors, and it gives us less of an excuse to just go in blindly, and we get to challenge ourselves by it. And I love that aspect, because we all have it. We all have it. Even the people fighting towards the Black Lives Matter cause, they have prejudice and stereotypes. It's just that I feel they experience the other side a little bit more than others. And this movement has been brought about because of some of the issues involving mental health. I feel like all these events together, Jimmy, has really, like you said, heightened the symptoms of anxiety and depression, depending on what's happening in a person's life. And it's become now a lot tougher. It's going to take a while for the world to recover. And when I say the world, I'm not talking about financially. I mean, there's always going to be another currency. There's always going to be this. There's always going to be that. Now there's crypto. Now there's this. I'm talking about for everybody to recover mentally from this, because this has been a roller coaster year. And I haven't even brought up the people who have lost loved ones because of COVID. And just from one month to the next, 1 week to the next, one day to the next, without expectations, poof. And that's it. And all of a sudden your reality and the paradigm we're living in changes. So, Jimmy, I really appreciate your work, man, because I feel like your work is now more crucial than ever, because there's not enough mental health professionals for everybody struggling right now. But your work allows people to tune in and see, hey, this person was experiencing this at some point in their life. They got through. Now they're doing better, and they seeked help, and people cared. So I shouldn't just give up right now and throw in the towel. And I want to say thank you, man, to you and your team, man, and everybody that's been involved in your project during these last couple years. And I'm just going to let the audience know, if you guys want to find the Human Aspect organization, I think you can find them on Instagram at the Human Aspect, and check out their website. Jimmy, what's that website, man? I'm sorry.
Thehumanaspect.com, of course, and the same for Facebook as well. It's The Human Aspect.
They
And I
can
also
find all the
wanted
videos.
to,
Yeah.
yeah, I wanted to touch upon, I've been engaged in injustice since I was a kid because I felt left out for different reasons than necessarily the color of my skin. But so I've had a lot of high-level conversations with top-level psychologists here in Norway around the subject. And there's a couple of things that came out that I thought was kind of important to address. And one of them was a lesson from my grandmother that I shared with the psychologist, and he kind of very heavily agreed, and he was like, that's the key. And he said, my grandmother was a wise woman. She was the kind of woman, no education at all, that's a life experience, just a bright light in this woman. And she said, life is not about not having biases or not judge people, because we're talking so much about, oh, you should stop judging people. This is something you say to kids, right? And you sometimes even say kids don't judge people, which is also fascinating. But like you said, the animal part of our brain, the instinctive part of our brain will always, and has not developed over the last 2,000 years, so it's not going to suddenly change, and it will evaluate. But she said, challenge that first impression. Instead of telling your brain to stop doing it, which is basically telling yourself to stop eating, which you can't, then you will constantly fail in your own eyes and you will kind of de-evaluate your own self-worth. Challenge it. Accept it. Challenge it, like we're doing now. Now in this movement, you are holding your purse a little bit tighter to yourself because you walk into the elevator, because you look like you say potentially Hispanic. Challenge that, accept it, just be okay, I did that. Why did I do that? Don't see yourself as a horrible human or a good human, because again, in this polarized world, and now especially with the Black Lives Matter on social media, I've seen so much very negative things. People harassing each other for using the wrong hashtag, people harassing each other for sharing a video of an artist that 5 years ago said something racist, and then suddenly even people trying to do something are being chopped down by maybe the most eager activists that have gone through racism. And to be able to address this situation, I think we need to agree on a couple of truths. Like you said, everyone have bias. Everyone judges people based on emotional experience and natural instinctive part of the brain. That's just how it is. So now we need to deal with addressing that. And like you said, maybe the most important truth, according to science, most bias, discrimination, and racism is subconscious, which means it's not necessarily that you are a horrid human being waking up in the morning, walking out the door, trying to make the lives of colored people horrible. That's not the truth. Because if we get to that point where people believe that the woman holding her purse tighter is a horrid human being, we will never get there, because she will never feel that she wants to do something because she feels it's unfair. So if we get to that point where we start discussing the real matter here, which is mental health, because there is anxiety for people that don't make us safe. So people who don't look like us, naturally, we will be skeptical or have anxiety towards. So we need to address that in school, in a public debate, and start talking about how are we to allow these things to naturally happen where they're just simple, harmless biases, and where the racism and active discrimination is what we remove. And that we slowly start giving people emotional experiences that humans are humans, which most of us know. You know, when you have met that one person, one of our interviews, a famous American guy, is called Arno Michaelis II. He started what is considered to be the largest neo-Nazi gang in the US. Was a hardcore Nazi, beating up people. He was a lead singer in one of the horrid bands in the US. And it's like the epiphany of an evil human being he was. And then he started working at a workplace because he needed money. At this workplace, there was one Hispanic guy and there was one then Afro-American guy. And he tried to kind of piss them off. because he was an idiot. So he was trying to piss them off. He was trying to get them to be aggressive so he could chop back. And they didn't. They stuck to their values. They treated him like every other person. They refused to join his game for months. And suddenly he started asking himself, he's like, what am I doing? Like these people, as he called them, that he was scared of, because I've interviewed him, so I know why he started. He was scared of them. He suddenly started realizing, like, what am I doing? My truth isn't right. And he said in his interview, hardcore neo-Nazi racist changed his life completely around because of two ordinary people at an ordinary workplace at a storage facility. Changed him from being a neo-Nazi to becoming what is now an active anti-racist, one of the most impactful active anti-racist people that have come from the neo-Nazi system. Who do you think can change other people from the neo-Nazi environment? A black activist or Arno Michaelis that was there himself? Right? So giving the opportunity to people to actively allow them to move from one side to another, this is the extremes, is essential, and push those role models up, because he can actually reach those people that we see as far off, right? The people we can't help, we're thinking. And all the people in the middle, like you and me, for example, we can be role models for people around us. I've shared so much things that I think is knowledgeable in this campaign, and I will continue doing that no matter if it's a trend or not, to try to inspire and help some. And the second we stop talking about evil and good, so that you have to choose side, I think we can actually succeed with this as well, and start having an enlightened discussion about how to move to the next level, not this fight between two sides, because there's no two sides in this. This is racism and discrimination. It is a human problem that needs a human solution, like I said, and all of us need to join.
What you just said there, Jimmy, is so beautiful, man, because the polarization of topics and the polarization of subjects, it's something that has been a bigger issue now more than ever. And I feel it's partly due to social media and the fact that you have younger people on social media who haven't gone through the full developmental stages. They're still engaging in this polarized style thinking, and politics hasn't helped, right? The good guys versus the bad guys, and then the bad guys versus the good guys. And they've turned Black Lives Matter to some extent about good and bad, right? Looking for reasons as to why it's bad and looking for reasons as to why it's good. And then they'll make this full-on conclusion, whether it's always the conclusion if it's whether good or bad based on some issues. And the reason some people, I'm guessing, has been hesitant to completely say I support Black Lives Matter is because there's people within high activists who immediately are looking to attack an individual for having a question, or for asking a question, or for pondering about something. And I always have to take that higher ground when that happens and try to explain to other individuals, this person, they may be out there in the way that they're going about it and everything, but I think what they're trying to say is this. And, it becomes a tricky situation, because now what you have is you have a whole group of people trying to push forward on a movement, and you have a couple of them who are actually shutting down the people who are trying to join the movement because they say this or because they say that. And it's some tricky times, man. It really is. And you touched on it, but I'm very glad that there's people like you out there, Jimmy, presenting this type of awareness. And I have seen some of the stuff you share, and it's really, really knowledgeable and does give perspective. And especially that last quote, man, on how they're polarizing this whole thing. And it's not just this, it's everything. And that is why the people elected right now in the United States are elected, because of this type of polarization type thinking. And people play into this game. They play into this game because it's a simple game to play, and the mind doesn't want to work.
It's their game as well.
Yeah, and it's
right,
and the mind doesn't.
Their game.
Yeah, It is their game, and the mind will fall for that trap. It's almost like a psychological trick that happens. I'll fall into the trap in different components in my life that I won't even realize it. And once we remember that nothing's good and nothing's bad and everything is an analysis, and you move forward and you make decisions off it, then that's where society and the world population starts making progress for the betterment. But until it's
Yep.
about money, until it's about good versus evil, it's never going to end, man.
There's a very good example of the US that probably all your US viewers is going to relate to. Very clearly, we have shown that countries that have higher education for police have less violence and close to zero deaths in the hands of the police. Racism by police in Norway, 100% existent, of course. But no one is running around in Norway being afraid of being killed by the police, because statistically the last 10 years it almost hasn't happened. So it's not a reality. So no one is scared of it. Even hardcore criminals are not scared of being killed by the police because it doesn't happen. So again, we know the solution. We, and by we, I'm talking about Scandinavia, have given you the solution. Like, there's nothing to discuss. Like, if you raise your police education from whatever you have now, like in Norway, we call it a weekend course. Obviously not. I thought it's like 13 months or something like that, I've heard. Correct me if I'm wrong. And into 3 years, a bachelor's degree, which it is in Norway. And then, of course, there's a long practical period as well before you are allowed to go alone and so on in Norway. And a lot of that bachelor's degree is about de-escalation, about human-to-human interaction and so on. Then that problem would potentially not be fully solved, not at all, but it would decrease massively. And then that solution is out there. No one cares. And so now, instead of talking about that, now we have the extreme talking about defund the police, like completely remove police from the streets. Obviously, if you look again into science, that's not a solution. And of course, there's not a solution to like militarize the police either, with the other extreme version that we're seeing now, right? Riot police and so on. So for me, it's so baffling to see how polarization allows to control the narrative. And I feel that this is exactly the new circus, the new way for politicians and governments to control. I'm not going conspiracy theory here. It's more that they are happy because it's an easy game to control. Like you said, if we had an educated discussion, they would have to address it. They would have to address the fact that, okay, so what will it take for the US to have a bachelor's degree for every single police officer in your entire 50-state country? That's an interesting discussion. What would happen? What will it take? And then the next one is like, of course, how are we dismantling the systematic racism in, for example, loaning facilities, in the jail system? Like, that's interesting discussions, because that's discussions that will actually potentially solve concrete problems of the massive puzzle of systemic racism in the US, but also all over the world. This is in Norway, this is everywhere. It's not just there. So for me, if I was sitting at home, to bring this back to mental health, and I was looking at this debate, I'm emotional, I have felt racism since I was born, it would be very hard for me to not join the polarized debate, to see the higher picture. It's much easier just to go out and say, defund the police, no justice, no peace, which are these catchy slogans, they're beautiful hashtags, instead of talking about how to fix it and focus on that and address all the energy into that. You are going into an election year. You have all the power to change it. So now I think mentally, if we are able to recover from this and sit back and actually realize that we humans can take a massive step towards fixing what I see as one of humanity's largest problems, also mentally, because experiencing racism obviously massively impacts self-worth. Self-worth, you get anxiety, you get depression, you get like lack of energy. So this is part of a massive mental health problem. So that's why I want to mix racism, discrimination with mental health as well, because it is correlated. This will decrease life quality for people going through it. And all the ones I've interviewed have shown that by a mile. So if we can fix that, we are actually fixing mental health as well, which is, what I'm extremely passionate about. Both of those, justice and mental health.
Jimmy, you are on point as usual. And man, I'm kind of disappointed because I do have to see clients now and I'm going to have to cut this interview, but man, this was a good conversation, man. And I really appreciate you coming on this platform, man. I really appreciate you giving insight and actually saying what I've been trying to say, but I've been scared to say, right? Because I'm scared of getting backlash. But on how to increase police training, it can't be 6 months. You said 13. It's actually 6 months, Jimmy, over here, which is the scary part, right? It's the scary part, and increasing education and all the nice things that you said and that you're doing to help the cause, not only for Black Lives Matter, but for anyone struggling with mental health through the Human Aspect organization, man. And the world owes you a big one. And knowing you, man, you don't even have your hand out asking for anything, bro. And that's why I have so much respect for you. And I really appreciate what you're doing. And I hope to speak to you soon, my friend, man. It's always really a pleasure to talk to you and to talk to your organization and see what you guys got going on. And once again, Jimmy, if people want to find you, where can they find you guys at?
It's basically the Human Aspect. If you Google the Human Aspect, you will find our website, you will find Facebook, you will find Instagram, you will find us anywhere. And on YouTube, of course, the Human Aspect as well. So we're lucky with having the one name, right? Like with Psych Life as well. It's like it's only one, the Human Aspect. So the Human Aspect, we're everywhere.
Well, guys, I appreciate you guys tuning in, and I'm sure you guys appreciate Jimmy. And Jimmy, thank you so much. All right.
Thank you so much for having me. And thank you so much for your Psych Life work as well, because together we create synergies. You're adding on top of that the knowledge level. I have experience-based knowledge, and together we can raise the awareness and knowledge level on mental health.
It's an honor to run next to you on that soccer field. All right.
Thank you. And the basketball court.
Take care, Jimmy.
See you.